Welcome. In today's video, we're going to take a look at how to create a confirmation dialog component. Now, if this is the first time you've been to my channel and you're not familiar with components, components allow you to kind of streamline the development of applications. Think of like a header component. And I actually did a video on how to create a header component, and you can check that out here. But in the case of a header component, you're thinking about something that is across every application that you build. Most of the times, it's on just about every page that you build inside that application. And creating a component allows you to basically have a pre-designed, pre-configured version of a component that you can very quickly streamline across all of your applications. Now, think about it in terms of like building a computer. I also do computer builds, and I don't grab all the transistors and resistors and put it all together. I go buy the component. And I think most of us do that for a lot of things. We go to the stores and we buy the things that are ready made and ready to use, whether it's a motherboard for a computer or maybe it's a hard drive or a video card, and you just kind of swap it out and put a brand new one in there. Well, components are the same way. You build it one time and then you can kind of customize it depending on how you set up the component across all of your apps. Maybe you want to change the color. You can build into a component all that flexibility to be able to do all the different adjustments that you need to inside of the component. Now, in this case of the component we're building today, we're going to be able to change colors, we're going to be able to change the text, we're going to be able to change the information that's being displayed, or maybe the text of the dialog. So we're going to build a lot of configurability into this component so that you can configure it to each different setting that you need to use it in. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So kind of think of the component as like the Lego block of a application. Maybe it's a left side navigation. And I did a video on how to do that here also. So if you want to check out how to create a left side navigation, please check out that video. I did a video on how you can just use the standard out of the box icons inside of the Power Platform environment. I also did a video on how you could use SVG icons that you pick up from across the web. So potentially thousands of different icons that you can use, a very easy approach. You can check out that video at this location here. So if you're interested in either of those two components, you might be wondering at this point, why are we doing a lot of different components? Well, we're almost done with a lot of the different component builds. There's maybe two more that I typically use in my developments that I was going to do on this channel, but we're getting ready to start into actual app development here, and we're going to use some of these components moving forward. On one of the future videos here in the next week or two, we're going to take a look at how to build an anonymous survey. That'll be essentially the first really app development on this channel. It actually doesn't use a lot of the components that we've been building, but we're going to kind of work our way into those. So these are use cases for how you might want to use Power Apps. We're going to start building those here shortly on this channel. Now, before I forget, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and get to other people that might like this content. All right, let's go ahead and jump right into building this confirmation dialog component. All right, so the first thing we want to do is adjust some of our settings. Let's go ahead and go into updates here. We want to turn on modern controls. And then let's go ahead and search for a component. There's an experimental feature here for enhanced component properties. Let's turn that on. And then under display, I always go to landscape unless I'm specifically designing it for portrait, which typically I don't. Most of the apps I build are for computers. You can also still use it on a mobile screen, but it's primarily used within a computer setting. And let's go ahead and hit the close button here. So there we go. And let's go ahead and rename our component. And let's go ahead and call this the confirmation component. And this is going to be what is imported every time you put it inside of your Power App. So make sure you pick a name that is easily recognizable and it's going to kind of describe what you're looking for. Now for our settings here, let's go ahead and adjust our height and width. So we'll say app.width. Then we'll say app.height. And what this is going to do is make sure that no matter what our app dimensions happen to be, it's going to fill the available space. So that's essentially what we're doing there with changing that. And then let's go ahead and add our first item here, and we'll go ahead and look for a container. And we're going to go with the regular full screen container here. We don't want to use a horizontal or a vertical just because we want to have the ability to kind of put it wherever we want very easily. So maybe we want it centered or maybe we want it towards the top of the screen. You'll have the ability to kind of adjust very easily where you want this to go by choosing this container option versus the horizontal or the vertical. Now, if you want to have a very flexible option where it maybe changes to fit the mobile screen or go back and forth between a tablet or a mobile phone, Then you would want to use a horizontal or a vertical and then do all the adjustments to make it fit where you want to put it. We're going to just go with a standard container layout for this one. And let's go ahead and change the name here, and we'll just call it a container confirmation screen background, because that's essentially what this is going to be. It's just kind of the background for our screen. Let's go ahead and adjust this here. And again, we'll go ahead and go with the app. So app.width, and then the height is going to be app.height also. There we go. So now we're filling the entire screen essentially. So think of this as the background, right? So this is just going to making sure that people can't click other things in the background when our dialog is displayed. Now, because of that, let's also take a look at what custom properties we're going to want. We're going to have the ability to adjust the height and width of our dialog, whatever is going to be in here, but we also want to be able to change the background color. So let's go ahead and add a custom property for component background. And that'll be a color. So we'll go ahead and select the color option here, right there, and hit the create button. And then we want to have the dialog box option. So we want to have a dialog height, and then we want to be able to set that as a number. And then we'll go ahead and add a custom property for the width. And that'll be a number also. Hit create. And we also want to have a custom property for our color of our dialog. So we can adjust the background of the overall component, so whatever that color is going to be that fills the entire screen, but then also change the color of the actual dialog. So let's go ahead and add a dialog color. And again, that'll be a color property here, and hit the create button. All right, so we've got our height, width, and color set up here. Now for our component background, let's go ahead and just put our color in here right off the bat. And for that, let's go ahead and adjust these. So let's select this, and we're going to change this to 214, 221, 224, and 0.1. And what that's essentially, what color that is if we come over here, it's basically this color here, but we've set it to translucent of 10%. So we're gonna be able to see through that. So whatever this is, we're gonna be able to kind of see through it and see the background and see everything else, except for the dialog, which would be 100%, so you can't see through that. But we wanna be able to set this right here, so we can't click anything in the background. So let's go ahead and do that. And then for our dialog height, let's go ahead and just set that to 200 for right now. And then we'll go ahead and set our width to 400. And then for our dialog color, let's go ahead and adjust that right away. So we'll say 180, 214, 250, and 1. All right, so there we go. Now that color there, what are we talking about for that color? And that's basically this color here. So if we look at that, we can see the numbers are basically the same right there. So I typically go with this as my dialog or some of my header colors right here, going along with the primary theme that I picked out. All right, so let's go ahead and create some more containers here. So let's create a vertical container. And essentially what we've got here, let's go ahead and look up container and vertical containers. So we can see that they're stacked. So we're making a dialog box. We're going to essentially have stacks, right? So we're going to have a button stack up on top here. Then you have your information stack in the middle, and then you're going to have some buttons at the bottom here to submit or save or send or delete or whatever you happen to need the confirmation box to do. You're going to have those buttons here. So it's essentially a vertical stack, and that's essentially what this is telling you, is that things are going to be stacked on top of each other. So let's do that. And there we go. And now here's the benefit of why we chose that containers. We can effectively put it anywhere we want very easily. Now you can use the other containers to do kind of the same thing, but it is a little bit easier when you use just kind of the classic container for your background. But that's something you have to consider is, do you want a really flexible screen, or do you want to be able to kind of pick exactly where you want this to go? And you can set variables too to define exactly where on the screen that you want this. We're going to essentially want it kind of in the middle for this design. So that's what we're going to go with here. Let's go ahead and rename this right away. So we'll call it the Info Dialog. And then we can go ahead and adjust our height and width right away. So we've got a width, we set that. So we'll look for that property, dot dialog width. And then we want to adjust our height right away. So that'll be confirmation component dot dialog height. So now we've got essentially our height and width kind of figured out what we want there. And then we can also change our color. So let's go ahead and adjust our color property here. and confirmation dot dialog color. And you can see that we've got essentially that lightish blue-ish color there. Now we also want to adjust our X and Y. So let's do that. And this will just be parent.width divided by 2. And then we want to subtract our width. So we're going to say con info dialog dot width divided by 2. There we go. So now we can see that we're essentially in the center. Now, if you didn't want it in the center, you would just adjust this up here to kind of put it where you want it to go, or you could, again, create that custom property so you can define that within the application afterwards. And let's go ahead and just copy this, and then we will adjust our Y value. And we'll paste that in there. Now, instead of width, we want it to be height. And then same thing here, we want it to be the height. There we go. So we are smack dab in the middle of the screen now for this dialog. Now the other thing we want to do here is we want to adjust some of our settings here. So I typically go with extra bold, so I get that little bit of extra color distinction there. I think that looks pretty good. And then I also like to adjust these to 15. I think the little bit more rounded looks a little bit better, so we can see it got a little bit more rounded on our radius there. All right, so now let's go ahead and add the portions that are going to be in the middle of this container. So basically our close button up here, I usually put a close button up here, and then you've got your message text right here, and then essentially the buttons again here. So let's go ahead and add some of those containers. Now thinking about the container for the top here, this is where we're going to want a horizontal. So we're going to want to be able to add multiple buttons potentially. So we're going to put a horizontal container up at the top. So let's do that. Oops. And horizontal container, there we go. And then let's go ahead and call that the container buttons confirmation component close. Kind of a long title there, but that's fine. And then let's go ahead and insert another container. And this will be essentially the text in the middle there. So for this one, we can go with kind of just about anything. It doesn't really matter. Maybe you want to have multiple text options. So you got to think of, maybe there's a left side and a right side, or maybe there's stacked messages of some sort. So you got to kind of think about how you're going to use this when you build it in there. But we're going to go ahead and use a vertical container. So we'll just call that a vertical. And let's go ahead and change the name of this right away. So we'll call this one con message. And then we got one more at the bottom, which is going to be our buttons. And for that one, we're going to want to use, again, a horizontal one, because we're going to have the buttons going basically side by side. So essentially it'll look like this. We have one button left, one button on the right, and there we go. So we've got all three of our containers. Now this top one up here is going to match our button size, but let's go ahead and add a button first. And for this one, let's look at cancel. So you've got essentially two options. You can go with the X approach, or you can go with this round. For this one, we're going to use the badge here. So let's go ahead and add that in there. And let's go ahead and take a look at our container here. We want it to be over on the right side, so let's put it there. And then I typically put it in the center so that it's not at the top or at the bottom, just kind of keeps it right in the middle there. And then let's go ahead and call this ICO close. And ICO is just short for icon. And then let's make some adjustments here to get rid of that border before we forget. I don't typically like the border on there, so I get rid of that. I don't like it when you select a button and all of a sudden you get that black border. Now you could adjust the color of the border also if you don't like that black border. I typically just don't like it at all. When you hover over it, you're going to get that hover over, and then when you click it, you're also going to get that clicking effect that you can see the difference there on what's going on. In my opinion, you don't need the border for everything that Microsoft puts a border on, so I typically turn it off for a lot of stuff. Now, what do we need to do? We need to define some of our sizes. So maybe we've got a layout in our application that isn't the custom. Maybe we've deviated from the custom page layout size. And when you do that, everything on your screen is going to look a little bit different, and it's going to scale. So you might want to make things bigger or smaller to kind of reflect that situation. So let's go ahead and define a button size. So let's go back over here and take a look at our custom properties and create a button size. Now let's go ahead and set that to a number. And we'll create that. And let's go ahead and add a value. We don't want 100. That's a pretty good size button. So we'll set that to 32. And then let's go ahead and adjust the dimensions here for the height to match that. So we'll say confirmation component dot button size, and we'll copy that. And I typically set the height and width to that, but you could also create custom properties if you want to have a flexible so that you can make it maybe taller or wider, and you can kind of set those dimensions in there. Now we're going to adjust some of the settings here. So we don't want it right all the way up against the edge here. So we're going to set our padding on the right to be 10. And then let's go ahead and scroll down here. I typically get rid of all of the drop shadows on the stuff that's inside of the main container. So we'll go ahead and select that to none. And then I set this to 0 also. So now we've essentially set that padding there. So we got a little bit of a standoff from the edge there, and we've got it in the center still. And some other things we want to take a look at for settings here. I'm going to get rid of this minimum width of 250. I'm going to put that at 1, and then I'm going to turn off the flexible height and actually just kind of define that. Let's see what 32 looks like. So 32 brings it all the way to the top. Maybe I don't want to do that, so let's go ahead and maybe we want to have kind of the matching 10. So essentially we would want to have 52. And then I've got a little bit of a gap here between the next container, the top, and I'm basically centered essentially between the top and the right at 10. So I like how that looks there. Now we could also get rid of the center if we wanted to. So maybe the button doesn't need to be centered in the middle here. Maybe it's at the bottom, maybe it's at the top, and we still have a little bit of padding that we could set there as well. So there's a lot of different ways you can kind of approach how you get this to set up like that. But this is typically how I do it. But we do want to have the flexible height turned off. And then let's go ahead and take a look at some of our other properties in here. So let's take a look at height. And we have a layout minimum height. So what we want to do is set that at 52. We don't want it to be smaller essentially than our button plus our padding at any point. And let's go ahead and take a look at our width here. And we've got a width of 500. We're going to want to set that to match our container. So we want to make sure that this always matches the container that it's inside of. So let's set that to the width, and there we go. So it's always going to match essentially our containing container for that setup. We're going to want to copy that because essentially we're going to have that for all 3 of these containers. So let's go ahead and put that in here, and then we'll put that in here also. So we can adjust all 3 at the same time for that. All right, let's take a look back at our properties here. All right, and everything looks good. So let's go ahead and take a look at the middle container here, and that's our message. So we're going to go ahead and add a text box in here. So let's do that, and then we've got our text box created. Now, one other thing, I was just thinking about this as I was looking at this, and we set the height of the container to be 52, which is a fixed value, but we made the button customizable. So we actually have to adjust this one more time. So we know that we want it to be 52 right now, but that is essentially our button size. So let's take a look at our button size. That way it's a little bit more dynamic, and we want to add the top 10 on the bottom. So there we go. So now if we adjust our button size, it's going to actually adjust the container to match. So let's go ahead and copy that. And then we go back into our height here, and we'll say our layout minimum is going to be that as well. All right, there we go. Now it's going to be more dynamic. And how we can demonstrate this, let's go ahead and try this out. So right now it's 32. What happens if it's 52? And we can see that it grew to match the button size, so which is exactly what we're looking for. So let's go ahead and put that back to 32 for right now. And there we go. Now some other things to think about. We've got the text. We've got the buttons. We know we're going to have some buttons down here. And then we've got our dialog color. Now, what if our dialog color isn't this light blue? What if it's white? Or what if it's black? Or what if it's red? Or any other color? What's going to happen here with our buttons? And the buttons that we're going to have down here, or our font colors and that kind of stuff. So when we hover over this, we can see we've got 2 colors we kind of have to worry about. And then you've also got what happens when you click on the button here. So you've got all of those things to kind of consider. Now, if you're going to be using a whole bunch of different colors here, you might want more flexibility in how this thing's set up. And then what you would do is, just like we created the colors for our dialog and our background here, you might want to create your button colors, or you might want to create the hover color, or the color that happens when it's clicked. So you have full adjustability of what's going to happen inside of this control or this component, when you put it inside of your app. Now, typically when I build apps, I don't need to adjust that because I go with this is kind of the go-to unless the customer has a different color preference that they're looking for. If they have a different color preference, then I might need to adjust the component or duplicate the component and then kind of make it more customizable specifically to the app I'm developing. But that is something you want to consider is, do you want to be able to adjust these different colors for everything in here? All right, so let's go ahead and create some more custom properties here for our text. And we want to be able to control the font size. So let's go ahead and create font size. And again, that's going to be a number value. And let's go ahead and hit the create button there. And we can go ahead and select that right away. So we'll just go ahead and change that, come down here to the font size, and we'll go ahead and set that in there. And there we go. And we can see here we didn't reset this, so this is actually 100 in there. So let's go ahead and change that. So we'll go ahead and put it at 16. That's a little bit more reasonable for size. And then the other custom property we want to do is, what do we want in this box? We want to be able to set this from inside of the app, and maybe we have it on the screen 6, 7 times. We're going to have a custom message for each example or usage of this. We're going to have the ability to adjust that. So let's go ahead and create a custom property here for dialog message. And again, that's just going to be a text. So we'll go ahead and put that in there. And then we can go ahead and adjust this to match that text that we just created. So we'll go confirmation component dot dialog message. All right, perfect. Let's go ahead and update the message right away. So we'll go ahead and maybe this one, we'll just go ahead and type in there, submit the request to the manager for continued processing or approval. And we'll end it with a question mark, so it's asking the person the question. And maybe this is a leave request, or maybe this is they've got to go someplace, or a TDY or a TID for a conference, or maybe it's some sort of a training, whatever the case is. Again, you can kind of customize it inside of the app to match whatever the situation is, which is the great thing about building these components. All right, let's go ahead and start making some adjustments in here. Now, let's go ahead and set our padding again. And for this one, we're going to go ahead and go with 10 all around, just to keep it kind of consistent with the rest of our design so far. And we have a little bit of standoff from both of the sides, the top and the bottom here. And the minimum width, we're going to go ahead and set that to 1 again. And then I always just go ahead and set the minimum height to 1. Just so that we don't have any potential issues there. Now for this, we're going to turn off the flexible height here. Now we want this to actually have a width of the container. So let's go ahead and set that to the con info dialog dot width. And then we're going to need to subtract our padding. So we'll say subtract 20. And there we go. So we filled up essentially the entire space there. Now we can see we cut off our text, which is great that we see that we have an issue there. So we want to have auto height turned on. That way it's going to grow to match the space there. So that's essentially how we want that to be working. And let's go ahead and take a look at some other things here. So because we set the theme, we don't have to worry about the font. It's just going to be whatever the theme is. And then when you pull it into the app, it's going to, again, match with that theme that's in there. And that looks good for this right there. Now we need to take a look at our container. So we want to adjust our container height. And right now it's set for 225. Let's go ahead and adjust that. And we're going to go to the text dialog dot height. And we want to add that 20 in there. So let's do that again. And there we go. Now we can see that our container is just slightly bigger than our message. And if our message is to get longer, this should also grow. But let's go ahead and test that just to confirm that's what happens. So let's adjust our dialog message here. And we'll just copy this. And we'll go ahead and add that in there. And we can see that it grew to match the available space. So we can go ahead and undo that. And our message, again, is the message that we selected to put in there. And let's go ahead and take a look at this. Everything looks good there. And if we look at the container, we do want to have it centered. So let's go ahead and center that in there. There we go. So everything's going to be centered now between the left and right and also between the top. It should keep it there just because of the padding that we set, but I do like to add that in there as well, just to kind of confirm that it's not going to be a problem. Now we do need to think about as far as our text messages, it's going to grow, but if it doesn't, where do we want the text to go? So let's go ahead and put that to the top. I like to have it closer to the top and then have a little bit of an extra buffer here between the buttons if necessary. If you keep it in the center, again, the way that we design this, we should never have a problem where it's not perfectly laid out. But again, I like to have my I's dotted and my T's crossed, so we just kind of throw that in there just as an extra control to kind of make sure everything's the way that we want it to look. All right, let's go ahead and adjust the name of our next container. So we'll say this is going to just be our container button options. And then we'll go ahead and add 2 buttons in here. So let's do 2 buttons in here. And then we can kind of see that we need to make some adjustments here. So let's go ahead and center them. And then we want to have a little bit of a gap. So let's go with our 10 that we've been using. So we'll have a little bit of space there. And then our vertical alignment, we want to have that in the center also. We shouldn't have to worry about the padding just because it's going to be centered here. And if you're going to have the buttons be longer, then you might want to consider about padding on the left or the right just to make sure. But typically for dialogues like this, your buttons typically don't have long text, so it's not usually something you have to worry about. All right, let's go ahead and rename our buttons again. So let's take a look at this first button here, and we'll say this is the button left, and this will be our button right. And let's just confirm that we changed the right ones. Yep, there we go, button left and button right. Now you might be asking, why aren't I naming these whatever I'm going to hit the save button or the cancel button or whatever we're going to use these buttons for? Well, inside of your app, you could use this for a lot of different things. Maybe it's to send an email, or maybe it's to save something or submit. Maybe you want to be able to change that language. So it is important to kind of consider how you're going to recognize things. So this is the left button, this is the right button. That's easy for me to understand and kind of follow along with. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, one of the things I need to take a look at when you're using your buttons up here for close, I use the cancel button here, but in other components, I didn't use the round. So you do want to have consistency, right? So if you bring in these components, whatever your dialog boxes already have set up is probably what you're going to want to have throughout your application. And I did set this up just so you had a different look and feel for how this is, but let's go ahead and change that back before I forget. I do want that to just be the standard cancel in here. So there we go. That's fixed in there. Now, what text do we want on these buttons? Well, like I said, it just kind of depends on how you're using it. So you want to have the ability to adjust these buttons. So what we're going to need to do is create some custom properties here for our buttons. So basically that button text. And again, we're going to call it the left button text. And then we're going to have our right button text. And hit the create there. And for our left button text, let's go ahead and say that we're going to submit. So that'll be our submit button for this example. And for our right button text, we're going to say cancel. Now, one of the things you might want to consider is, do you need a cancel button up here if you got a cancel button down there? Great question. And again, this is just to kind of give you a lot of different flexibility on how you design it. You can also make it so that maybe it's just one button. Maybe it's submit, or maybe it's OK. And then you give them this option up here. You can add visibility properties as your custom properties over here. So maybe you've got situations where you need 2 buttons, or you've got situations where you only need 1 button. Maybe it's just like an OK button to acknowledge something. Maybe that's the approach you want to have. So you have a lot of flexibility on your component designs on what you want to put in there. But for this one, we're going to have the option to hit the cancel button up here and the cancel button down here. So we'll have this be assigned to this button here. So let's go ahead and assign that quick. And this is going to be our confirmation component dot left button text. And then this one here is going to be that right button text. So we'll say confirmation component dot right button text. And there we go. So we've got submit and cancel as our options. Now, one of the things I do want to take a look at is maybe I want to have a little bit wider on our buttons. So let's go ahead and adjust our width here. And for this, we'll just go ahead and make it maybe 120. So our buttons are a little bit bigger in here as well. And the other thing we want to take a look at while we're looking at it is our font size. Now you can't just use the font size that we created here, or maybe if you want to have bigger fonts on your text for your buttons, you can just create another custom property. For this example though, we're just going to use the font size that we already built for this so that our font sizes throughout this are all the same. So we'll just go ahead and select our font size here, and that will be our confirmation component dot font size. There we go. And now our font size here will be the same as our font size here. Now that we've got the dynamic font size option here, one of the things we have to consider is how big is our font size going to get and whether the button width and height is going to be sufficient for that. So these could again be custom properties that you can put in there. For this example though, all we're going to do is change the height of our buttons. We're going to give ourselves a little bit more room. So we're going to go with 40 here. So that gives us a little bit more space. So if I increase the font size to say like 18 or 20, I think it'll still be sufficient, but let's go ahead and try it out and see what happens. So if we have this at 20, what is it going to look like? And we can still see that everything fits at least for the amount of text that I've got on there. But this is again kind of demonstrating exactly how this would work. So you can kind of play around with the design and you can add the custom properties that you think are going to need based off of the apps that you're building. For most of the apps that I create, this is typically the size button that I need for a dialog. Again, this is just kind of like a confirmation dialog. So typically you're not going to have a lot of text on the buttons. You could also just add in a dynamic approach. So maybe the width and the height, taking consideration the button size, because your button size, a lot of times, if you're going to have larger text, your button size is probably going to be bigger just because maybe the layout is a little bit more dynamic and maybe you've got that custom canvas size that changes everything because of scaling. So that's something to consider for this as well. But for us, I think that looks pretty good on how we've got that set up. And one other thing I'm thinking about as I'm looking at this text here, because we've got the auto height turned on, there's actually an auto height property. So if we take a look at our height here, we want to make sure that our height is going to be adjustable because we've got the flexible height turned off. So we want to make sure that this height actually adjusts. So what we're going to want to do is actually make this adjustable as well. So let's go ahead and say text dialog dot auto height. All right, there we go. So now our height is going to actually match that auto height adjustment that we've got in there as well. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some of our properties for our container here. And we can see that we got an adjustment we have to make here. So let's go ahead and do that quick. So we're going to turn off our flexible height. And for our height, we want to make it kind of fit our buttons. It's never really going to change in size unless you add those custom properties for the button height, width, and that kind of stuff. So our height's really just going to be kind of a fixed number. And we made our buttons 40, so we want to have 10 on the top, 10 on the bottom. So we're going to go with 60 for this. And there you go. We can see that we've got that gap there. We do have a little bit of a gap here at the bottom just because of how we set up our container to work, but we're going to adjust that here in a few minutes. And then for our minimum width, let's go ahead and set that to 1 again, because again, we don't want to have a situation where our minimum width is kind of restricting how small this can get. So we'll just go ahead and put that in there. Now you could also just kind of set those minimum widths to an actual property that you never want it to go below. I typically just leave it as 1 and it works fine. So, oh, we forgot to adjust these as well. So let's take a look at getting rid of these properties here. And we probably did the same thing here. So let's take a look at our container. So if we select our container, yep, we forgot this one as well. So we'll adjust that and get rid of that. There's much better on how that is set up. All right, now let's take a look at our overall container here. Now we set the height property here to be a property that we can adjust, but we have so many other things that we can adjust, we might not actually need this. So let's go ahead and take a look at other options we have. Now this is essentially all of our other containers. So let's just take a look at our containers. We've got the top container here, and that's the height of this. And then if we go ahead and add the container message dot height, and then if we go ahead and add the bottom container, which is our buttons dot height, what do we get? And we get essentially the container is going to now match exactly the space that we need here. Now in the case of this button up here, that controls the height of this container. So let's see what happens. Let's go in here and actually adjust our button size. So if we make our button size 50, what happens? Our overall container grows to match that space. Let's go ahead and put that back to 32. And let's take a look at what happens when we adjust our text in here. So if we go back into here and we change our dialog message, and again, let's go ahead and just copy this and go ahead and paste that in there. And what happens to our dialog is it grows. So everything looks like it's working the way that we want it to work. Let's go ahead and undo that. And we're back to the original design. Now we're going to actually build some custom properties for what happens when we click these buttons. So let's go ahead back over here, hit a new custom property, and we'll say this is going to be the close on select, and we'll go ahead and set that as an event here. And for the property, we'll go say text and hit the create button. And then we have to do our left and right button. So we'll go ahead and say what happens with the left button on select. And again, that'll be an event, and that'll be a text and create. And let's go ahead and do our right button on select. And then again, that'll be an event, and that'll be a text, and hit the create button there. And then let's go ahead and actually assign that. So we'll come over here to our on select, and that'll be confirmation dot component dot close on select. Let's go ahead and copy that. Oh, we forgot to put the parentheses in there. And let's go ahead and our left button, select what happens there. And this will be our left button on select, parentheses. And we'll go ahead and copy that. And then our right button on select, and paste that in there. And then we'll just change the word here for right. And there we go. So now we've adjusted what happens essentially when we click all these different buttons, and we'll set the actual properties for this inside of the app once we add it in there. All right, let's go ahead and go test it out. And we'll go to our screen here, and we'll go ahead and make this a little bit smaller, and then we're going to add our components. So if we come over here, we'll come down to custom confirmation component, and it perfectly filled the entire screen just like we wanted to. And if we select this and go to the properties, here's where we can adjust all of those different colors. So if we didn't want this color here, we could go to say this color here, and we can adjust it. And this highlights, again, what font color you want, what button color you want. What do you want to have happen if you hover over it? Because that's a color that you have to take into consideration as well, is that hover over color. So maybe you want to have those custom properties so you can adjust all of those values here. And again, it's the exact same setup as what we just did. For brevity's sake, and to not make this video 2 hours long, we're not going to cover every single property other than just kind of talk through what you might want to consider when you're doing this. Now, in the case of the dialog height, we actually don't need that because we created it dynamically. It's just going to basically match and adjust. So if we adjust our button size in here and say 60, everything grew the way that we expected it to. Let's go ahead and put that back to 32. And again, if I go ahead and copy this in here and I just go ahead and update that dynamically, everything is going to adjust. And if we go ahead and back that out of there again, and we can change our buttons, maybe instead of submit, it's a save. Maybe we want to have a save button on there. And it's just that easy to make all the different adjustments. And I can go ahead and adjust that back here. Now these close on selects are a little bit more tricky. We have to actually build what's going to happen here. So in the case of like close on select, and I'm not going to do both the left and the right button. We don't have anything in this application or this component in order to really test that. But what we can do is test what happens with close on select. So let's go ahead and set that. And all we have to do is come into here, and we'll do an update context, which creates a local variable. And we'll go ahead and put the proper format in here, and we'll call that local confirmation dialog visibility. And we'll go ahead and say false. And then let's go ahead and copy that. So when we click this button, that's going to essentially set that property. Now, we have to come over here and adjust our visibility. So come up here to visibility, and we're going to put that property in there. And there we go. So we've essentially made that dialog vanish. So we have to create a button so we can test making it visible again. And in here for our on select, we're just going to paste this in here, set that to true. And let's go ahead and click the button, and perfect. So if I go ahead and close this, again, it goes away. Now, if I go ahead and select this button again, maybe I want to test both the ability to block it and also see it. So if we go to our screen, we have a button on top. So we got to put this at the bottom here. So let's go ahead and reorder this, and we'll send it back to the back. So essentially this is going to be on top of the button and prevent us from clicking the button. But we can also test it by coming into here and turn it into essentially a toggle. So let's go ahead and put that in there, and put a little exclamation point, and let's go ahead and click this button. So I shouldn't be able to click the button, and sure enough I can't because this is covering it up. So let's go ahead and close this, and everything is working as expected. And you would essentially do the same thing depending on your app usage on what you want to have happen. Now, in the case of cancel, it's actually the exact same thing as what we have for here. So we can actually set that one up just to kind of test what that looks like. So let's go ahead and copy that again. And for our right button on select, let's go ahead and set that in there as false. So now if I click the cancel button, it should again go away. So you can kind of see how that functionality works. And you can see that the visibility toggled there as well. Now, just a reminder, if you like the content of these videos, don't forget to hit that subscribe and that like button. It really does help the YouTube algorithm identify this as something other people might like. So definitely hit that button if you like the content. In future videos, the next up for a Power App, and we're actually going to build kind of a very basic and kind of standard Power App. A lot of times you want to do anonymous surveys, and it's very easy to do that with the Power App. In today's environment where SharePoint tracks everything you do, whether it's SharePoint Online or kind of the SharePoint 2019 or some of the newer versions of SharePoint, it tracks everything you do. You can turn that functionality off. There is a way to do anonymous lists, but a lot of organizations don't like that. They want to kind of track what's going on and be able to roll back through the versions and that kind of thing. So they turn on the tracking of who's doing what. You can use a Power App to create an anonymous survey. And that's a great way to conduct surveys. If you don't want to use something like SurveyMonkey, you don't want to pay for that kind of a subscription or some of the other products that are out there, you can handle everything in-house for your surveys and still actually complete some of the analytics for those surveys very easily inside of the Microsoft ecosystem. So that's in a video that's coming up here in the next week or two. So check back at the channel if you're curious about that. And that whole subscribe and setting the notifications so you can see it will help you get notified about things when I post it. So if that's something that you're interested in, don't forget to do that as well. But hopefully found today's content helpful. Until next time.